So I think one of the important takeaways has to do with the nature of the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular SDG 4, which is the education one. So there's a couple of things to say. One is that they've followed the previous Millennial Development Goals, which were very narrow. There were just 2 education goals. And now there's of course just one SDG for education, but within that there are a very large number of things that are included, which encompass the whole of education from early childhood right through lifelong learning, whereas in the past, under the Millennium Goals, it was just about primary education. So I think this is a very welcome shift. Another very important shift is the emphasis on equity. But that said, these are what I consider the great positives. The sort of negative in my mind is that precisely because everything is now there, it's not so clear what the priorities are. And so I think that more work is needed for them to become operational for countries. Because right now, a government that, say, wasn't serious could probably get away with saying, well, we're following the SDG, because basically countries can set their own targets. So I think that we need to make them a bit more specific, or we need to find ways to make them more specific. And, another important point, there isn't really a proper accountability mechanism. So not only, we're in the process of developing measures, and hopefully that will be finalized fairly soon. So then there'll be measures, but still, who's going to then, what are the consequences for country X if it doesn't achieve something? What are the consequences? And maybe the consequence is none, and maybe that's fine. The idea is it should just be publicized and they should feel bad or something, but I think that is something which really hasn't been thought through. And that's broader, by the way, than just the education one, though I'm concerned with the education one. That's true of the SDGs as a whole. So that's one important set of takeaways from yesterday about the SDGs. Another important set of takeaways, I think, have to do about what we think about the role of private, or I think I prefer to call it non-state education. So there was clearly some disagreement among the panelists and also with Professor Schneider-Kamsey, who basically, I think, I don't want to put words into her mouth, but is basically somewhat suspicious of, let's put it that way, of what she would perceive as the encroaching role of business in education. And I think many of us share that, especially with regard to many aspects, such as the commercialization of tests and testing regimes and all that sort of thing. But where I would disagree, I think, is around this very hot topic of so-called low-fee private schools, which I think many people see as a kind of a thin end of a wedge, whereas I just see as something rather different. I see it as a reaction by parents, I mean the fact that parents send their children to these schools, poor parents, to the fact that frankly in many places still the government schools, the public schools, are either simply not there, as in say Peri-Ober-Nakra of Ghana, where I have spent quite a lot of time, where there aren't public schools, so it's not. So that's a failure of the state. Or there are public schools and they either are not of good quality or they're perceived as not being of good quality. So I think these need to be understood a bit differently than as just some sort of commercialization. I think they also need to be seen as telling us something that needs fixing within the public sector. And I fear that all the attention which is being paid to this sort of negative side of it is interestingly deflecting attention from the negative aspects of public education, which is what is creating this phenomenon. So I would like to see a much more balanced view about these low-fee private schools, and also getting away from the sort of accusing them of being sort of just after profits. Most of them are legally for-profit structures, yes, but they're typically a sort of single proprietor, a person who's a teacher who's decided to set up a school. And I don't think you could say that profit is their motivation. Profit is necessary because the person has to feed their family or what have you, but it's not really sort of that profit is the driving thing, because they're not trying to expand or anything, they're just trying to provide a small school for educating local children.